welcome to Transforming Urban. Transforming Urban is a podcast and webcast that highlights Black developers in the city of Chicago and throughout the country, specifically related to the commercial real estate development game. That means real estate developers, retailers, some of those pioneering developers and pioneering retailers who have really transformed urban corridors in Chicago. Our goal is to learn from the past so that we are better in the future, so that we're building community, we're building a more unified group of real estate developers, and we're really impacting the city and the cities that we locate ourselves in more impactful ways. So today we are really engaged in a top of the line conversation about the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam in the city of Chicago continues to be a very powerful force. Uh, Definitely thousands of members in the city of Chicago, to accompany the thousands. Are there millions of Nation of Islam members in the city, in the country, Wendy?
In the world. I think when you go to the world, you can go to millions, definitely hundreds of thousands in the US.
Right. So today we're talking to Wendy Muhammad. Wendy Muhammad is an entrepreneur, a real estate professional, an author of a book, and really embarking on a really top of the line archival and history related project with the Nation of Islam that we're going to learn a heck of a lot about. But we're going to talk first to Wendy about the city of Chicago and the Nation of Islam's real estate holdings in the city of Chicago. And I'll talk to you quickly about why the Nation of Islam came up when we were having this conversation about professionals that we were going to speak to who are currently in the game, in their 80s, that kind of thing, and still have built major high rises in Chicago, built retail strip centers in Chicago. And one of the first things that someone suggests to me is the Nation of Islam, you know, dominated the Chatham area in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, dominated the Auburn Gresham area, holdings on 79th Street, major corridors with high traffic, etc. And, some of that I was privy to in the 80s, but a lot of that we did not know that much about. So before we go into that, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us on Transforming Urban. We really appreciate you coming on today. Talk to me a little bit about sort of your background and your history with the Nation of Islam.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. It's always an honor and a privilege to just be able to share information like this and to be in a position to be a source, and that's important to me. So, as you mentioned, my name is Wendy Muhammad. I'm a business developer and real estate developer. I started out my career moons ago in public accounting. I came into the Nation of Islam at 23 years old and began working at the national headquarters and for Minister Farrakhan, and did that for a number of years, and then went on to build my business as a real estate agent, and then eventually as a business consultant and business developer. And as you mentioned, most recently, I reclaimed the home of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad that had been vacant for a number of years, and we snatched it just before it went up for auction. And I was blessed to do that. And so the idea behind that, as I'm sure we'll talk about that, is to create a sacred space for us to come and learn and understand the mindset of these great developers and these great men and women who met in that home, and how significant Chicago is to our development as Black people.
Wow, that is really fantastic news to hear that you were able to um, reimagine what is a sacred space for the Nation of Islam, a sacred space for Black Chicago history and Chicago history on top of that. So that is a blessing. That is more than just a home. That
It's more
is,
than just a home.
it's more than just a home. So I look forward to sort of understanding that. So, transforming urban is really sort of the intersection of Chicago Black history, Chicago real estate, and if you've got history and real estate in Chicago, you're talking about Chicago politics. So let's talk about, what you know about the 1960s and 70s and the vast real estate holdings that the Nation of Islam had. You see several reports, and I'll pull up some artifacts shortly that discuss as they were looking at, Elijah Muhammad's life, they would always reference, he's worth, or the Nation of Islam is worth $75 million worth of assets and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So we would see that all the time we're talking about that. And then they would sort of reference the different things. Talk to me about sort of the real estate holdings, just generally, again, why was it important to the Nation of Islam and some of the things that you're familiar with in terms of those holdings?
Sure. During that period of time that you're talking about, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad built an $80 million plus empire. And for that, we're talking primarily of the holdings that were Nation of Islam holdings. And there were thousands of Muslims throughout Chicagoland, as well as around the country, that also had their own businesses and that were entrepreneurs and that had acquired real estate. Um, Part of the teachings of the Nation of Islam is that we should do for self and that we should not continue to beg other people to do for us what we can do for ourselves. And so we've been given the instructions as believers to do something for ourselves. So you'll see us as entrepreneurs. I recently organized a Black Muslim business directory, not to really exclude anybody else, but to really show the level of professionalism and the number of professionals that we have that are Muslims and that are conscious entrepreneurs in our community. So that was a tenet, if you will, of our faith then and it is now. Um, there were, of course, a number of national holdings that were held by the Nation of Islam that included things that solved problems in our communities or that met our basic needs, like restaurants, bakeries, um, farms in 3 states, printing presses, cold storage for meat packing, banks. Um, there were affiliates also with the broader Black community, with insurance companies. And one thing I really want to point out, Lauren, that I've learned through my research is that we were a lot more unified as a people than that the media would lead us to believe. Somehow, through the civil rights process, we were forced to pick sides. And so everybody kind of got into their corner and picked a side. But if you look at the different groups of people that visited the home of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, they were from all walks of life, all walks of Black life, from Christians and different denominations of Christianity, different denominations of Muslims, Black Jewish people, and so just about every leader that house is probably the most important piece of property in modern day African American history. I'm pretty sure that it is, because every leader that you can think of has been in that house and came there to meet, to dine, and to talk about our plight as Black people, from Senator Adam Clayton Powell to Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Mrs. Betty Shabazz, Dr. Martin Luther King, Kwame Ture, um, Minister Farrakhan, you name it, those people were in that house. And so I think what's interesting, if you go back to that letter that you just passed, that's a great picture, by the way. You see all these, but if you go back to that letter, look at the people who were copied on there. Whitney Young.
Exactly.
So these people were meeting and having meetings about our plight as Black people. And so these real estate holdings um, were a representation of where their vision was going with us as Black people, in terms of ownership, in terms of policing our own communities, in terms of owning our own healthcare facilities and managing our own healthcare, in terms of producing and distributing our own food, um, handling our own money, banking, and insurance. This is where they were going with all of these amazing meetings that were happening there in that house and in the community. And Chicago's significant to that because, very much like the original Caucasian settlers in Chicago, um, they combined their different levels of spirituality with business development. So many of the top icons in the business world who were high order of Masons or high in the Christian community came together in many of those homes throughout Hyde Park or Kenwood and the Chatham area and met and did just what our people were doing in the 60s. They met, they prayed, they talked about their spirituality, their commitment to their people, and they built businesses. You got Goodyear, you got Montgomery Ward, you got Helene Curtis, you got all of these icons, Sears, Hershey, Wrigley, that came to Chicago for that purpose, and they were very unified in their meetings, and they fraternized together and worshiped together, if you will. And so when you look at what was happening in Chicago and many other cities, where all of these people were coming together in this house in particular to have these various different types of meetings. I'm looking at Stokely Carmichael on this letter, Whitney Young, and we see many photos of these leaders in the home. It says a lot about what happened to us and what we have to focus on to prevent ourselves from this continuous rise and fall as a people. And I think a lot of it has to do with how once we're made to pick sides, then it's easy to take us out one by one. And in the Nation of Islam, we've studied this for 45 years. So, or almost 45 years, since the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stood back up and decided to rebuild the nation. He has talked and given us lessons on unity. And he stood down from a lot of battles and things that people think he should have taken in the name of unity, in the name of not shedding the blood of our brothers or sisters or harming one another. And I don't want to go on too long. I want to talk about my experience and what I learned in Benin and some tools I think that we can use to prevent this kind of thing from happening. But if you take those holdings of the Nation of Islam, Lauren, you add that to the hundreds and thousands of Muslims that have businesses, then that's a Muslim store there, then the other non-Muslims that you're talking about who mentioned to you the Nation of Islam businesses, who had significant businesses, if that unity had been allowed to grow and develop, I think we would have a different reality where we are today.
And I think
Things would
that's
be
a
completely
great
different.
place to really sort of put us in focus as it pertains to our ability to survive the current climate
Mm-hmm.
and climates in the future. It really is about unity and not just talking about it, but doing something about it. And most of that, I believe, can be achieved by understanding the past a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
If we
Mm-hmm.
embrace who we are, how we are connected across the board as Africans, I think
Yes.
we can start there. Some people don't even want to be African, so uh, I'll stop I'll stop sharing it here. But
Okay.
unbelievable archival material. Thank you so much for putting that information on Instagram and sharing some of these great histories that we should know about across the board, not just the Nation of Islam, but everyone should know about the type of history, Black history contribution that the Nation of Islam has had. We know about the Million Man March, right? But you all were forging partnerships and collaborations, decades before that. So let's talk a little bit about Chicago. I'm going to throw up another sort of round of archival materials, and I'll start by saying the information that I was able to access in the amount of time I had was not all of the Nation of Islam's publications, which I'm sure are vast, but the
Mm-hmm.
information that, of course, that I can research as an archivist and obtain easily. And so the first stop was looking at the Chicago Defender and sort of looking at its archives. And, they have archives that are accessible from 1913 or so to today. And, we see a lot of really interesting, if we look at the Defender, which, I think, we can find some, you know, I'm always sort of cautious at looking at archival materials because you have to understand the context. Is it a favorable context? Is it a
Mhm.
positive context? Or are we taking a Eurocentric view of something? So we have to always look at
Mhm.
that. Defender had a lot of great articles about the Nation of Islam, really, sort of understanding the empowerment that was taking place in different areas in the city of Chicago. Also grabbed some archival material from the Chicago Tribune, sort of later in the 1990s, where we're looking at maybe a different point of view on the Nation of Islam and its holdings and sort of the impact that the nation is
Mhm.
having on Chicago's South Side, particularly. So I'll start with the Chicago Defender, and just really a fantastic, sort of discussion on
Mhm.
what the Nation of Islam is doing to contribute to life in Chicago, which I think was just really great. So it talks about
I
this is
see this is
1974.
not yeah, November 28th, 1974. A lot of people don't realize that in that earlier that year that the envoy Elijah Muhammad had received a proclamation from then Mayor Daley for his efforts as a leader in the Nation of Islam and in the city, and you'll see that on the Sajda House Instagram page. There's a copy of that proclamation.
And it really just says so much about what was happening and how the Nation of Islam was, again, positively impacting Black lives, Black real
Hmm.
estate, and just really sort of bringing a new point of view to a lot of people that could not be, challenged. I mean, you were doing fantastic things. So this suggests that in Avalon Park, 1974, you all had an event you all had the Salam restaurant that was on 83rd and Cottage Grove. As
Hmm.
time goes on, we'll see that you added another one on 79th Street, a little bit closer to Halsted. But the Salam restaurant, if people continue to do a lot of research, what you'll find is that the Salam restaurant was bringing in top of the line entertainers, top of the line scholars, athletes to come and bring people to the restaurant. Dick Gregory spoke at the Salam restaurant. I have one of those. I don't think I have that article up, but just tremendous amounts of, I think, sort of again, Black love, Black leadership, at Salam
Hmm.
restaurant in the 1970s. And so one of my great stories is one of my colleagues, when I think Gail Sayers just recently passed, and one of my colleagues put up a picture of Gail with his signature saying he remembers obtaining this at the Nation of Islam's restaurant on Cottage Grove. Clearly this was before 19, yeah, probably around the same time, 1973, two, something like that. And just what he remembers that. This gentleman is 50 something years old today. He is not a member of the Nation of Islam, but he remembers Gail
Hmm.
Sayers being there. And then we have great articles with some of the, top of the line organizations meeting at the Salam restaurant back in the day. So, what do you remember? What have you learned from your research and from the artifacts that you have at Sajda House that we will discuss a little later on?
Hmm.
What do you remember? What was known about the Salam restaurant?
What I've learned about the Salam restaurant is just the opportunity for Black people to experience fine dining, which we take for granted, right? Because we get up and we just go downtown and we can go to a white tablecloth restaurant and sit down and eat and order from the menu, and not realizing that that was not accessible to the majority of the Black community in the 60s and not even in the 70s. So to have a Black restaurant offer that to you where there's clean food that you can trust, great food that's coming from the farm, that's halal or organic, um, and also offering entertainment that you normally would have to maybe go to a nightclub or something like that to hear. But here you are in a safe environment, you're in your neighborhood, it's fine dining, you're being served just like you are, or probably even better than you would be if you were downtown. And that to me because I'm a big person on mindset. When I go back to mindset, I can only imagine how that endeared our people in the community, not only just to the Nation of Islam, but to one another. Because when you get to visualize, when you have other visions of your people other than just what you see on television that is jaded by the media and controlled by the media, and you get to go into an environment and you see your people dressing up, you see your people being served and you're being served. And you can look over at the other table and say, oh, there's Gail Sayers. Let me go get an autograph. And maybe Gail Sayers touches your child on the head and says something beautiful to your child. Or maybe Muhammad Ali just plays around with them. These are these are valuable moments that can change people's lives. I mean, here's your colleague saying he's 50 something years old and he remembers where he got that photo from and is somewhat endeared to Gail Sayers to this day. And so this level of camaraderie, of fraternization, of family, sharing over food and entertainment is critical to our unity because, again, we've sort of been isolated, made to pick sides, and now everybody's kind of off to themselves, and there's really not a level of unity that we saw back then. Obviously, then there was not a lot of television, there was no internet, so you had to go somewhere for your entertainment. But if you look at the value of that, and then you're dining in a building that is uniquely decorated, you got linens and curtains from Morocco and Turkey. You're eating on fine linen. You're eating on real silver. These are things that a lot of our grandparents and parents had never experienced.
That's true. So, I mean, that really brings the Salam restaurant to life. So thank you so much for that description, and sort of it really, makes it very real when you think about the impact that just one restaurant
Mm-hmm.
could have on an entire community. We have those issues today in the city of Chicago and certain corridors in Chicago. You don't have a lot of sit down, sit down, casual restaurants. A lot of fast food, a lot of quick serve restaurants, etc. We're in COVID now, so no one can survive it. But no one wants to sit down inside. But if you wanted to, it'd be very difficult. You know what I mean? And to
Mm-hmm.
do so, in fact, also with restaurants, managed by people of African descent. Um, that's just again top of the line. There used to be literally sort of a handful of black restaurants, Army and Lou's, Chicago, 87th
Mm-hmm.
Street, 83rd Street. There were a few, but not a lot. So this was clearly very
Not a lot.
popular. Yeah, not a lot.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Lauren, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but this just came to me. When we begin to, let's say we're college students or even as adults, and we begin to see people who look like us open businesses and run businesses. I remember watching my aunt who ran a daycare. She had her own daycare center. And I just remember sitting there staring at her. And what's going through my mind as a little girl was, how does she do this? Who told her it was okay to do this? Where'd she get the money? And I remember she collected black art. And I remember thinking, wow, she's paying all that for that little piece of something. But when I look at myself today as a businesswoman, and I think about, I collect art. Um, Look at how that influenced me. And I didn't even consciously think about that, but somehow on a subconscious level, it just changes you. And so that's why these types of establishments are so very important. Shows like yours, where somebody can say, oh, there's this sister, Lauren. She has a show and she does real estate. She's a developer. Look at her sign back there, lot for sale. That does something to people. It makes people feel like I can do it and it's okay. Because we don't realize the propaganda that's around us that really honestly makes us feel like basic things that we should be able to do that we just can't do them. And so these Muslim businesses were and are beacons of hope for our people.
That is so true. I mean, I think sometimes you have to see it to believe you can do it. But at
Mm-hmm.
least at least you could have read it in the Defender that, even though your parents and no one in your immediate family is operating a bakery, The Nation of Islam has a phenomenal bakery at 440 East 79th Street, which is on
Mm-hmm.
79th and King Drive. So it's really about a half a mile between King Drive and Cottage Grove, or maybe that's a mile between King Drive and Cottage Grove. So you've got the restaurant on 83rd and Cottage Grove. That's about a mile and a half of influence. And then you also have what we see here in this article, the National Clothing Factory, that's on 455 East 79th Street, which is clearly just next door almost to the other one. So again,
Mm-hmm.
empowering 79th and King Drive. You have the Temple
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 clothing store also on 79th Street. And
Mm-hmm.
then a grocery store, your supermarket, 8345 South Cottage Grove. And then the Salam Sandwich Shop on 84th at Cottage Grove. I mean, you
Think
all
about the
are.
grocery store, though, Lauren. Think about that grocery store. That I've had that grocery store described to me by a number of people who went there. It sounds like the precursor to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's.
Hmm.
When they said you walked in and there was produce and things, fresh produce that came from all over the world, that was, non-pesticide, that were non-harming, didn't cause you, your allergies, no cancer. All that good stuff was right there in the front. They said that when you went down into the middle, there were the herbs and the kind of like the natural, I guess, medicinal type of thing with the teas and stuff. So I'm envisioning the smell, right? Just like when you go into some of these natural stores. And then in the back, there was the butcher shop where the meat came from the farms and it was not non hormonal. So think about what that would do to our community. And sometimes we think about we need thousands of these. Yeah, it would be great to have thousands of these types of supermarkets, but just think, if there was one in Chatham, maybe one in Bronzeville, and you just had two or three maybe today, think of how that would change the health conditions of our people and our children. Because in a lot of these grocery stores, you would hear the sisters talking about how they may have sold dinners out of out of there. Just like when you go to Whole Foods, you can go down the buffet or get a pre-prepared meal. Look at what that would do to our community. And if you have a family of four and they can go to your supermarket or a place like this or one of these restaurants, get a clean meal, and let's say they do that twice a week, as opposed to eating some of the poison that we all are subjected to, what would that do? We wouldn't be losing 100,000 people a year to cardiovascular disease.
Well, you know, let me go on. And I don't think I have
Yeah.
this graphic up, but speaking of that, one of the major news stories of that day was the Nation of Islam's interest in creating a hospital, something for
Yep.
preventative care for
Mm-hmm.
for the Nation of Islam and Black people on the
Mm-hmm.
south and west sides of Chicago. This article
Mm-hmm.
right here suggests that it says, and I quote, if any single organization has done more to build up and rejuvenate Chatham Avalon Park, it is the Nation. This is how impactful the Nation of Islam,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
was to Black people's lives. So you
Mm-hmm.
all were looking to not just sustainability in terms of our ability of our health, but then looking to preventative sort of concerns and issues as well. One of the events that I saw that Dick Gregory was speaking at, it was a fundraiser so they could build that hospital. So a Black
Yeah.
hospital on the south side of Chicago. It's amazing. And
You
so
see this 25,000 acres of land, excuse
25,000
me,
acres of land. Unbelievable.
500-bed hospital. So I'm a hospital developer. I am, myself and my business partner, we built a micro hospital here in Maryland, and we have 27,000 square feet. We don't have overnight beds, and we are praying to find an opportunity. There's so many community hospitals that are closing in Chicago, and so we're
Yes.
looking to bring our skill sets to Chicago to be able to put this hospital up. But 500 bed, that is that is impactful to say the least. Most of these hospitals you see, they'll be anywhere from 100 to 200 beds. 500 beds is huge. healthcare disparity, if we just talk about that for a minute, I see it every day, is huge in our community. And it doesn't matter how much money you make or how professional you think you are, there are just inherent biases in the healthcare system that will impact you. And that if you don't know a healthcare professional to help you navigate around it, you're going to be subject to. And so, just the thought of saying we need a hospital so that we can start saving lives. And again, um, it doesn't always take a lot to make an impact. And so my one of my biggest prayers right now is that some of these abandoned hospitals and hospitals that are closing, that we have an opportunity to go in and develop. My business partner is already meeting with surgeons. He meets with them once a month. His group is called Black Men in White, I think, and they're surgeons, and he's just galvanizing them and gathering them so that, when we find this space in Chicago, we can start dispatching people, once we get everything developed. But that's a game changer right there, our own hospital.
It really is. I mean, again, this also suggests, we're talking about real estate, and you see clearly you've got acres of land, but you talk about, again, these businesses that, the nation is supporting and embarking upon: a coffee
Mm-hmm.
shop, clothing factory, importing fish from Peru. It says in
Mm-hmm.
one of the things. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
clothing store, a bank. These things are, really the types of things that we again, at this time in Chicago's life, we don't have any black banks. We barely have any black grocery stores, if we have any, because we did have one, but now we don't. But somebody could have something I might not be familiar with. But in terms of a
Yeah.
top of the line grocery store, something like what you're suggesting, it's really difficult to find. Let's say in the city of Chicago. It
Mm-hmm.
says the Nation of Islam provides modern housing for 800 persons. Farms are maintained in Georgia, Alabama, and Michigan. And then, of course, they go on to suggest that your Temple number two, which is now Mosque Mariam, you're suggesting, is on 73rd and Stony Island, was purchased in 1972 at $4.4 million. That's a tremendous investment into
Mm-hmm.
real estate generally, and certainly on the south side of Chicago. That is a tremendous investment in 1972.
It
Um,
is.
so talk to me again. Why building these businesses? Why was it so important for the nation to do that? And in all different sectors, you didn't just stop at a particular type of business. You all contributed into all types of business types and sectors. Talk to me a little bit about that.
The idea, Lauren, is to create a space for our people to safely develop and grow, and shed some of the baggage of slavery that has really stayed with us to this day, and also to liberate us from the predatory capitalism that is causing the healthcare disparities, that got us sold into slavery, that is causing some of the police brutality and the redlining and predatory lending and things like that. When when the most honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us, we need to separate, it started with creating our own communities. And the idea is we need safe spaces in order for us to live, to grow. That's why so much money, even again, spent on the temple, where people can go. And a lot of people think the Nation of Islam, or don't realize that the Nation of Islam is so broad in terms of just providing what we call freedom, justice, and equality, but a level of civilization to our people, so that they don't have to go out and be a part of a savage economy just to make a living for themselves. And so, once you can be free from that, you'd be surprised at where your talents and where your creativity and things like that will come from. And so that's the idea. There's safe spaces, and that brings me to, I think, what I was saying at the beginning when we first talked about when I spent right before the pandemic some time in Benin, and going to the slave trading posts, um, and looking at the malls that were built with where they sold children in literal malls. And my question was, how did these children get here? How did this happen? And as we were going around to some of the king's castle, what I realized, king's castles, what I realized, Lauren, was that it is what I call a breach in the ranks. So, in other words, I don't like you and you don't like me, so we fight. And then when I capture you, I sell you and your children, or I make you my servant. And this continual tribalism and breaching the ranks and separation and isolation is what allowed the Portuguese, the British to come right in and say, oh, y'all got this nice little slave trade thing set up. It ain't as big as what we want it to be, but guess what? We got guns and we got horses. And we're going to come in and take this thing over, and you're not going to have you're not gonna be able to say anything. So all those slave castles y'all built and those things that y'all put each other in and those tombs that y'all bury each other in when y'all don't like each other, we're gonna start trading slaves from there. And we're gonna hire you to help us because we can't get off the boat and go into the jungles or into the villages and go get slaves. We can't do it. So we gotta hire you. So I started thinking about that. And when I add that to um, thinking about the Nation of Islam and thinking about all the Black businesses, even going back to Black Wall Street, and when I read about, people like S.B. Fuller and Annie Malone, and I look at somebody like Annie Malone and I say, what happened? She had $17 million in the early 1900s, riding around in a Rolls Royce as a Black woman with an orphanage and a building. So what I started realizing was it's the breach in the ranks. It's the, well, we gotta find a way to get over. Even if somehow, Lauren, you and I don't get along, I gotta reserve my emotions because I can't come and destroy your empire. Somehow we have to unite around our race and say, let me stand down. That's my sister. Let me stand down. That's my brother. And a lot of what happened in Africa is that separation, that tribalism that got us sold into slavery. But then when you look at the 60s and 70s, when we were all made to pick sides, we were all separated. Now, here we all got picked off, all the different organizations, one by one, whether our leaders were assassinated or whether there were legal cases that were brought down, but there was no unity. We didn't close in on each other and say, hey, let me get behind Lauren. She's got this or that going on. We didn't do that. We acted the same way we did when we were set up to sell ourselves off into slavery. And so that piece is what I believe we have to fix so that you and our children are not looking at the same thing going, man, they had this and they had that, and Wendy did this and Lauren did that. We want to create intergenerational wealth so that we transfer that over to them and we can continue to grow. But I think it starts with a level of unity and us being very conscious about not allowing ourselves to be separated and picked off, even if we believe differently, even if we um, go to different churches or different mosques or different religions or different backgrounds. That's going to be critical. I see you have Muhammad Ali's new business venture up. There's no reason why.
1968. 1968.
Yeah.
He is ahead of the game. Quick serve restaurants now are everything. They're the only thing surviving in this pandemic. And in 1968, he wanted to open Champ Burger. Right now, we've got Smash Burger, we've got, all the other burger chains
Mm-hmm.
that are on fire. And he was, again, this article suggests this is going to be a franchise deal. He's looking
Mm-hmm.
to put these in as many places
Mm-hmm.
as possible where Black people um, can, he says he will train
They
future
can buy
franchise
into it, huh?
managers of generations for generations, but he only wants it to be for uh, Black people to own in their own neighborhoods. I mean,
Wow.
forward thinking across the
Wow.
board. This is a franchise deal, 1968. And, we don't know what happened to it. We don't know what happened in the past or after that. We probably need to look into that. And
Yeah.
I think there's so many different things that sort of then just people start to discuss the rise and fall of this empire. But
Mhm.
first, I'll just
Mhm.
go back and then just highlight again that the Nation of Islam, you see here, operates the Salam restaurant on 79th and Union, which was a little bit further west of the original one on
Mhm.
83rd Street. And then they owned a huge commercial building on 79th and Halsted. And it says, and owned a number of other properties in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. So the Nation of Islam was really running the show between 79th and Cottage Grove and 79th and Halsted. That's a matter of 3 or 4 miles in the city of Chicago. That's a broad holding. That's tremendous impact. Again, the mayor
Mhm.
is meeting with the Nation of Islam because they know that this is important. The aldermen of
Mhm.
that area arranged the meeting to
Mhm.
ensure that we recognize that the Nation of Islam, and this is the second mayor, this is the second mayor, this is 1997. This is
It's the
not the
second
first
Daily.
Mayor Daley. This is
Mhm.
sometime after that. And, when you look at some of these articles as time goes on, it's a lot of negativity. People, are really sort of, um, which is, outrageous because, again, because we're not as unified, we'll look at the Tribune and, they're saying this is a sect or this is a different type of, cult. And this is how they'll label these really bridge building organizations in the city of Chicago. He was absolutely, the Nation of Islam was building tremendous bridges between socioeconomic status, between religion and spirituality. Black people could not deny, and Europeans could not deny the impact that the Nation of Islam was having. But if you continuously sort of pick out, again, and pick us, put us against each other, then all of a sudden, you have these divisions, and
Mhm.
then we start to see, unfortunately, the decline of some of
Mhm.
these businesses. Right now, I'm not sure what is left in the city of Chicago that we're privy to so everyone is privy to um, to gosh, that
Visit.
can
Yeah.
join can be a part of. Talk to me a little bit today about in Chicago what you're familiar with as it pertains to real estate holdings. Clearly, we can start to talk a little bit about Sajja House and
Mhm.
what you're doing there, and just the great story of your ability to bring that back to the Nation of Islam, make it active again, activate that site. What else is going on as it pertains to real estate holdings? What do you still own, have? What's happening today?
I can't speak for everything, but I do know that the Salam restaurant obviously is still there, and I believe that it's partly open now. Um, and again, it goes back to as you were talking, I was thinking about Tom Burrell's book, where in the book he talks about at some point the brainwashed become the brainwasher. And so when you see these articles and these kind of things, and we are so quick to react whatever we see in the media and whatever we see in the press, and a lot of times we know it don't make no sense, but we just react. We're just trained to react. Um, there's the Final Call newspaper building, which is right next to the Salam restaurant, where the Nation of Islam's current newspaper is operated from. There's some real estate holdings around there, dress factories and things like that. There's also obviously the mosque. There's the mosque there on Stony Island, which we refer to as Mosque Mariam, and there's also as well the what we call the palace or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's home right there next to Sajda House. Sajda House is an independent project, not owned by the nation, but owned by myself and a foundation that I started. And the idea, again, is to promote that history. And my hope is that when people come there and they can see photos and video as they're walking through with a tour of what was, and most importantly, the unity that was there, that it will inspire us to all go out and do our own thing. Because one of the things that I think is important that gets left out of that story is that, yes, the Nation of Islam had the $80 million worth of businesses, but we're not even counting the number of other Black Muslims and Black people that were inspired to also own their own businesses in places like Harlem, all over Chicago. You'd be surprised at the number of business leaders who were impacted. Even I was reading somewhere that at the 1968 Democratic Convention, many of the delegates during the riots and everything, the bloodbath that happened downtown, they were protected by the Nation of Islam, and that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad sent the men, the fruit of Islam, to pick them up, bring them to the house, to feed them, to take care of them. Some of them stayed there. They met, started to kind of work on an agenda. I don't have I'm not privileged yet to what they spoke about, but that's the level of unity that, again, we have to see in order to, because we're in rebuilding stage, not just as the Nation of Islam, but as Black people in general, because just
True.
about everything we had has been destroyed. And even with this home on Woodlawn, I mean, it'd been sitting there vacant. Probably would have been someone's personal home at some point, or somebody told me somebody was trying to make a bed and breakfast or a nursing home. This is sacred space. When you walk in that home, you're standing on floors that great men and women stood on, and you're inside of walls that they spent time inside of. And I think that that's important for us and for our history. And I've had people to stop by. We're definitely not doing tours yet. And I remember talking to a young brother who was saying to me that he had spent 17 years in jail. And when he came to visit me, he was standing on the porch and he cried because he said he couldn't imagine in the 17 years he had been in jail standing on the porch of the home of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and walking up the same stairs that Martin Luther King walked up. And he knew more about the history than I did. He was like Kwame Ture, Senator Adam Clayton Powell. And when I tell you he let out a guttural cry, that that was so, it almost changed my life, because it made me know the impact that this history has on our souls. But as he stood there and said that, I just looked at him and I just said, wow, God is really truly great. And what a blessing. We can't, he can't even really go inside and see. He's just on the porch, because we're working on the exterior and then we'll move inside, but he's just on the porch, Lauren, and he's breaking down. I'm talking about a big grown man, spent 17 years in jail, lets out this guttural, like his soul cried out to be in that space. And so imagine what these types of historical places will do for our people. I heard that Muddy Waters House is going to become a tour spot and people are going to go there. I mean, my grandmother listened to Muddy Waters. When I heard that, I was like, when I hear his music and I hear that guitar, I go to my grandmother who would
Right.
play that and who loved it. What is that waking up in our soul? And what is that doing to rattle the bones of our ancestors whose dreams are inside of all of us? And
Well,
and it may
this is
seem like it's just real estate, but it's not just real estate. It's sacred space.
it's sacred space. It's history. It's inspirational. It drives us to greatness, to understand a little bit about the past. People don't even realize that where they live is right next door to where one of the greatest blues musicians, the person who really created rock and roll, lived right there
Mm-hmm.
50 years ago.
Right there.
Same way
Yeah.
with what you're
Ooh,
doing.
just gave
Again,
me
I'm an
chills.
archivist. I know. I'm an archivist and historian, and with everything that I do. So, work both my work in real estate. I work also in music capacity in Chicago as well. And sort of understanding history is always the basis of what I do, Black history. So, what you're doing at Sajda House is just tremendous. Tell me a little bit again about the exact address, what you envision, what the future is, dates. Give me some
Hmm.
timelines on what you're looking to do there.
Yeah.
And talk to me again about the great exhibits we're going to see and some of the other great people who were privy to spend time with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in that space.
Hmm. So the address is 4847 South Woodlawn Avenue. It's a brick home that we have carefully worked to restore. I call it restoration with a toothbrush. Every brick carefully matched, the mortar carefully matched, everything being done by hand, the lead glass windows, touching them up by hand, honoring the actual original architecture of the house and the number of different styles of architecture that that house embodies. It was originally the William French Burroughs house that was built by the historic architects Frost and Granger, who built a lot of train stations for the early train entrepreneurs, if you will. Um, and so there weren't a lot of residential homes that they built. So this home is special from that standpoint. Mr. Burroughs was one of the high orders of Masons, and his wife was one of the daughters of the Revolution. And they built this home to be a spiritual place to hold their meetings and to do business. And so throughout that particular home, there are many different types of woods that she used to conduct different levels of energy. She put the color azure and copper on the porch to represent wisdom and history. And then here we are in 1952 with the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad moving there and combining this high level of spirituality with economic development and bringing our people together there. So we have lead glass windows that we've carefully restored by hand, that are original. We have the woodwork in the home is almost perfect. So when you come in, the idea is that there on the first floor, we are working to replicate the way it looked in the 60s when the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad lived there. So you get a chance to really see what it looked like, and then we'll have some video. We have a really high end level of technology that we're going to be using with 3D resolution videos and holograms to really put you in the space of some of those meetings. So if you walk in the living room and you see the furniture set up, but then you'll see this 3D video that maybe is him and Muhammad Ali talking, or him sitting with Kwame Ture, and you'll feel them because they'll be life size. So you can walk up and actually measure your body against the height of a Muhammad Ali and see what it looked like. James Baldwin was there, which was very iconic at the time, being that he represented the LGBTQ community back then. And there's articles out there about his meeting and how he described it. And so that's the idea on the first floor. In the dining room, we have what are called the table talks, which are recordings of a lot of those meals and dinners and those meetings, because most of the time they met over food. There was one, I believe, one of the meetings with Martin Luther King that was done in the living room, and then they both came over to dinner. And so there's all these recording that people won't be able to sit down and listen to all the recordings, but we'll show snippets of that and let you hear snippets of what was happening there. And then the interesting thing about the kitchen, again, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad was so ahead of his time. The kitchen, I call it COVID friendly, right? You know, it's got where you bring the groceries in the back. It's walled off. You couldn't bring outside groceries, or you couldn't come into the kitchen from the back with your outside clothes on. After they sanitized and cleaned the food, then they brought it into the main part of the kitchen and prepped it, and served it. You got things like two sinks on each side of the kitchen where people could wash their hands. And
Wow.
you and I both know with these historic homes, you didn't see that
No,
back then. You
but he
didn't.
was
You
ahead
didn't.
of the
You had
game
this.
for sure.
That's right. You have the small little kitchen. You know how it is usually with a butler's pantry, and then there's no extra space for you to go wash your hands or clean off your food. So I think that that's an important piece, because he wrote the book How to Eat to Live and talked to us about how we should preserve our health. And so some of that you'll be able to see that setup in the kitchen. And then on the second floor, which is mainly bedrooms, we're going to do an exhibit on the Nation of Islam businesses in the larger bedroom that was actually the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's bedroom. And with the use of technology, we can change those exhibits out because there were so many businesses, we can't do them all at once. And then there's other rooms up there, other bedrooms, two other bedrooms that we want to use to celebrate other iconic Black entrepreneurs in our community, like Tom Burrell. We've spoken to him and his family and doing an exhibit on the work that he did so that people can understand how impactful his work was. And we'll be able to change those exhibits out. I personally just love Annie Malone. I'm looking at doing an exhibit on her because a lot of women don't know her and what she accomplished,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to be able to go in there. We're going to do an exhibit on Minister Farrakhan's wife, Mother Khadija Farrakhan, and we're going to set it up almost like, I don't know if you've been to the First Lady exhibits over here, like at the Smithsonian, where they have their dresses in the room.
Right.
A
Okay.
lot
Yeah.
of people don't a lot of people don't know that she's an entrepreneur. She owns a couple properties herself in apartment buildings that she rents out to people in the Nation of Islam right there on 79th Street. Very nice buildings. She runs a sewing factory. And so a lot of people don't know that about her. So this is also an opportunity for us to highlight women that people don't know about, like Mother Farrakhan, like Annie Malone. People have no idea, they're going to come in and probably spend a lot of time in those two rooms. And of course, the great Tom Burrell, and then the nation's businesses. And then we have the third floor, but that'll pretty much be off limits to the public because we kind of got to have a place to run the operation and
Right.
run the building. Right. And then behind the house, there is a garden space back there. The
Hmm.
front garden, we've designed it very, very beautifully, so it just attracts people. When people come there, I really want them to feel a level of elegance and statesmanship when they come there. I want people to walk out feeling good about themselves. And in the back, we've worked to design a statue called the Cracked Atom. And the idea behind the Cracked Atom is that there's 7 members from the African diaspora, and they're all coming together, holding their hands up together, and a sign of unity to our brothers
Nice.
and sisters throughout the African diaspora. And there's a coach house where we'll do like a small little gift shop, not like Cracker Barrel style, but where you can perhaps buy a coffee mug or different little products that we'll use to continue to sustain the project. So that's the idea of it, and our goal is to be able to change those exhibits every couple of months. That's why we're using technology. Plus, we don't want to alter the historic nature of the building.
Right.
We don't want to hang televisions and be rebuilding and knocking down walls and things like that. We really want people, when you walk through and you touch this pillar or you step on those stairs, it is really historic. When you're in that dining room, you could be sitting in the same or standing in the same area where James Baldwin stood, or where Martin Luther King stood, or any of many of these other historic leaders who came there. And we'll have an opportunity to share that. There was a huge one of the things we're researching now is the connection with the Hispanic or the Mexican community, because we found a number of pictures and photos of him meeting with members from the Hispanic community. And with these archive photos, you just got to figure out who the people are and start
Right.
asking around. But what's interesting is bringing that piece of it, and how the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wanted unity between the Black and brown people, and spent quite a bit of time working to make that a reality. And so that's the idea. And I really want to convey again that we were not quite as disjointed as the media makes it look like. We were just made to pick sides, after at a certain point. But I, I just I just have a hard time believing we were that disjointed when you look at the number of different people that were in just that house alone.
I think it's amazing. I think it really does say a lot about what um, the Nation of Islam has done over time to bring Black people together. And it's up to us not to allow these outside forces to bring us apart. We have to do things to keep us together, and I think it is history. If we recognize the time over the times over and over in which Europeans have allowed us to again pick sides, but put us against each other. And if we were to do that across the board, our whole lives would be very, very different. What we did in the world would be very, very different. Our impact throughout society would be very, very different. We're still impacting the world, we're still impacting ourselves and our
We are.
communities, but the level to which we would be able to run the shows would be unbelievable. And I thank you so much, Wendy, for number one, recognizing that history is critical and important to our
Thank
ongoing
you to
well
you too.
being, and
Yes.
for talking to Transforming Urban a little bit about the Nation of Islam and its rich history. And you are going to continue to tell that history, so we're continuing to learn and do better. And I
Yes.
definitely want to make sure that everyone is invited to Sajda House when we can come in, because that is exciting. Whatever help you
That's gonna
need
be.
archivally, with history, any of those types of things, I have a gang of professionals who are ready to contribute free of charge at any time. So you just let
I
me know.
appreciate that, and we are going to be. I'll be tapping into you probably as soon as this week because, as you know, with a project like this, it gets bigger, and we're looking March, Aprilish. Hopefully, we'll be able to start doing some tours. Um, the team is doing such a great job with just kind of restoring everything by hand. I could not have asked for a bigger blessing, and so I'm grateful for that. And I think it's so important that we just all continue to work together. So I appreciate your offer. There's so much history there, and I know that I've only just scratched the surface. And I know that, deploying a team like yours to really start to dig in and work with, I have a couple of archivists that are Nation of Islam archivists on my side, putting those people together. You'd be surprised at what we're going to find out took place in that home and the number of meetings. Because I'll tell you one hint. I was looking at the pictures of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Martin Luther King, and there are three different pictures, and they have on different suits and different ties.
Hmm.
And I always thought there was just one meeting. And I said, did they go upstairs and change for dinner? Or did they meet? And then there's one particular photo, there's a grainy video where Martin Luther King walks in and Coretta, his wife, Mrs. King, is behind him. And she's just kind of being really playful. And she's such a prim and proper woman with, so much style and class. And she was just being silly and laughing. And I was like, oh, they knew each other. You know
Exactly.
what I'm saying? I'm like, they
Exactly.
knew each other. You don't do that, especially not somebody of her type of stature and style. She was not a playful, loose type of woman at all, but she always presented herself with elegance and dignity is what I'm trying to say. But she was very playful with her laugh and her smile, and I'm like, the change of clothes, the big smile on her face, and then the big smile on Elijah Muhammad's face. I'm like, they knew each other.
That's when you know you're comfortable. So you've been around
Mm-hmm.
someone you've already been around. I'm sure they've had several conversations, all had gotten together. I think both of them, leaders of that caliber, the world wants to put them as enemies. But in fact, they know if they're spiritual people at all, there's love there, and there's one common
Yes.
purpose. And so there's got to be a compromise. There's got to be some way to have a conversation about that. So I
Mm-hmm.
believe wholeheartedly that you're right, and I think those pictures are going to really share a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we continue to dig, we will find more
Yeah.
evidence of their ability to be friends and to
Mm-hmm.
present their cases to the world the way they saw fit, but still not make them enemies. So that's
That's
going to be
right. And I
great.
think your team, looking at those photos with sort of fresher eyes, will be able to kind of glean some of that stuff that I was saying, like, why
Hmm.
is this person here? And, just kind of understanding, putting dates together. And I think that's how we're going to be able to back into some of the history.
Well, I can't wait. That's just going to be that's just a joy for me in all
Yeah.
honesty. Like so exciting. But all right, I will not take up
Thank
too
you
much
so
more of your
much.
time, Wendy. Thank you so much. When in Chicago, look me up. If I'm in DC, you're in the DC
Absolutely.
area, right?
I am, I'm half and half now. This project's taken over my life. I'm trying to hold on, but the project that the ancestors are like, nope, bring us out. We're ready.
Well, that's fantastic. It's gonna it
I'll send you the
totally is so
dates on
exciting.
when I'm going to be there.
Okay, yeah, that'll be great. Alrighty, so
Okay.
thank you all. Thanks to the audience for listening and viewing us as well. This is a podcast and a webcast. And thanks again, transformingurban.com and Transforming Urban, wherever you get your podcast. We're on, I think, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. So check us out everywhere, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thanks again, Wendy.
Thank you.